Hey, Brett, it's so good to catch up with you. Thanks so much for taking time to share some insights. I know you got a lot of great knowledge up in that head, and I'm really looking forward to picking your brain. But look, before I do, what have you been working on over the past few years that brought you into the Firewire team, and how did you become part of that team?
Yeah, thanks, Vip, for this opportunity. Great question. I spent most of my career, as you well know, in product merchandising. Went through the reigns of apparel companies with Rusty, founding the Realm Von Zipper, and then ended up at Reef with VF Corporation for 11 years, and kind of went through the gamut of all these different product categories, right? In a merchandising role. And when I was at Reef slash VF Corporation, the learnings from that giant were incredibly powerful, and uh, quite surprising, to be quite frank, because you would think that a big corporation like that would just be, chasing the numbers, chasing the metrics, which they do. However, they chase it with what they would consider being white space. They call it white space all the time, and investors, coin that phrase, and use that phrase a lot. But what it meant in those conversations was really the consumer and what the consumer was doing, how the consumer was behaving, and how to really map a future forecast with regards to those behaviors. And as a merchandiser, your job is really to marry what would be considered fashion trends or category trends to sales forecasts that would then obviously take a brand to where your financial obligations would be. However, you tend to forget that amongst this chaos of trying to make a brand grow and happen and reach those numbers, brands often forget that there's actually a human at the end of this whole game, and that human is the one that buys the product. And we sit in these four walls and we have conversations, we have levels of anxiety, we have our agendas, yet it is very, very seldom that the conversation really is directed to this human called the consumer. And so I developed a piece of software while I was at Reef slash VF that allowed me to kind of look at, I tried to kind of have a look at data and try to map data to consumer profiles and to evaluate what essentially would be erosive behavior that would be the demise of a brand. And I spoke at a SEMA event in Cabo the one time, and I spoke about this whiplash scenario where what people see from a corporate perspective and what consumers do are often very mismatched. And it's a very simple solution. However, it's often too simple for companies to kind of understand. And I called it how to make big data small. And really, at the end of the day, this software allowed me to kind of map product categories, look at sell-through data, which I was taking at the time, sell-through data from Action Watch with Kerry and his team, phenomenal organization, and Patrick's doing a great job today with that whole platform. I highly suggest people sign up to Action Watch if they're not already signed up. But what I started doing was not looking at the data as a scorecard of how we're doing, but looking at the data as these humans transacting and looking at what are considered velocities and looking at what I would consider saturation levels, kind of looking at sell through like a stock analyst would look at stock on the stock exchange. And then I took this philosophy, and when I left Reef, I basically went and I got a couple different contracting consulting jobs at like Billabong when they were doing their turnaround, and I started kind of using bits and pieces of this tool here and there to kind of validate what certain assumptions were out there. But soon I realized that there was a significant lack of kind of seriousness about the consumer. Like, people didn't take the consumer seriously. Very few brands actually do surveys. Most brands are terrified of getting told bad news. Most design departments design and then hope for the best, in the sense that they're designing what they see in stores, but often what they see in stores is actually not what's the truth. Like, there would be cases where people walk into a store and monkey see, monkey do. They see all this insane product. However, that insane product's been there for an insanely long period of time, meaning it's not selling through. And making assumptions and designing lines that ultimately would expose the brand with excess inventory, which then would erode their margins. But more so importantly is that when I stepped back and I realized that, so arguably, if you are designing a line that's got 100 pieces, let's say, and you have to obviously manufacture minimums for the most part. If you're manufacturing offshore, you have an obligation to carry a certain amount of inventory. Now, if you are not looking at that inventory by consumer, like L-Space, an incredible bikini line. I had the fortunate opportunity to work with that team there with Monica, and she's an incredible team of girls. And they actually took the initiative to really start looking at their business by consumer and going, hey, these bikinis are this consumer, these bikinis are that consumer, and really evaluating their business by consumer. And a lot of companies talk about this, and often, they get consultants in that'll show you what your consumers are, and then that goes into the top drawer and never gets seen again. However, when you put it in a system and you put it in a format and you put it on the calendar, and the teams actually live and die by the consumer, then what happens is you actually start looking at your inventory by consumer, and you basically go say, hey, this portion of the line is really this consumer. Their appetite is going to be X. We don't want to be exposed with inventory. Keep in mind that all exposed inventory ends up in a channel that is not necessarily the most sexiest channel for any brand. And so you're basically allowing your brand to be on humans that don't necessarily fit the actual essential intent of that product. So, for example, if you're going to sell to Costco and you are an action sports brand, you have to be mindful that the Costco consumer is potentially a family man, middle-aged, and if you're going to sell them a product that is more, aged down, you have to assume that there's going to be product impressions when a consumer sees another consumer with that product. They have to make a decision in their mind whether that product is cool now or whether it's not cool based off the human that's actually transporting that product. And so this whole notion of this relationship between a brand and the consumer is not very far. It's not very different to a relationship between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or a husband and a wife, or a group of friends, in that it truly is a relationship. And so I've been looking at technology in different forums, looking at a lot of marketplace technology with the World Surf League. The big challenge for us at the World Surf League was what is the appetite of the surf consumer to purchase jerseys outside of it being a keepsake? And it's a big question. And it's when you look at it from a consumer point, it's not a very big question. The big question is, why aren't you asking the questions? Like I said, brands are often scared of what they're going to be told. But once you get used to the fact that your biggest revenue opportunity is in your biggest, let's call it, obstacles or problems, then you understand that your problems is actually is money. And if you can solve problems, you're making money. And so that's kind of where I went from merchandising into like this whole consumer world, and wrapping digital tools around it. I've been fortunate enough to deploy a bunch of apps in the last 10 years. One of which is called Floor Sites, which is a retail navigation app that I'm aligning with SEMA on to help brick and mortar stores with merchandising, and brands with merchandising. Is basically like the Instagram of in-store. So we can see what the stores look like in a state of COVID, so that people don't have to be driving around with taking photographs of stores and such. I developed a community app with the faith industry with a prayer app called pray.org. And then I'm working with a family app right now with an app that helps parents raise their kids, and it's a fun app for parents with it's like a disciplinary kind of log, so to speak. You can log how your kids are performing and such. And the reason why I mention this is that these are all apps that are all very simple. They're very community based, and when you look at the consumer is now inundated with messaging, and a lot of that messaging is questionable. Consumers are now at a point where they're so exhausted about trying to figure out what is truth, what is not truth, that they're tired of being sold. And so this whole notion of creating a relationship with the brand and the consumer is probably never been as important as it is today. And so with Firewire, their approach to me was we wanted to develop this digital platform that can build a relationship between us and the consumer, so that as we extend our products from shortboards into longboards, into traction, into leashes, and into a world of hard goods, which is very, very complex when it comes down to your specs, board performance, that we have a true relationship that is not just selling a consumer once, but selling the dream that the consumer will travel with you, and so you can sell over and over again. So that's kind of how I ended up at Firewire, and Mark and I have some history with regards to working together, and he's also very innovative in his thinking, and he heard some of the ideas that I had, and I heard some of the things I was working on. I'm like, wow, there is some great opportunities here to really kind of change the way that we engage with the surf consumers. And so, February of this year, I joined the Firewire family, and it's been incredible. And the brand is, excuse the pun, on fire. But it's not been because of luck. It's been very strategic, and it's been very exciting to see some of the things that we've deployed come to light and show really good results. So long-winded answer.
Well, it's a great long-winded answer. There is so much to unpack with what you said, but look, a couple of things. One is that I've always felt that our industry has not paid attention to data. And data is something that I look at all the time. And you mentioned Patrick at Action Watch. It's funny, I got an email from him today sharing some insights, and I love getting updates from him as to what's going on. But as I hear your journey and everything that you just mentioned, it's like I'm kind of reminded of that movie Moneyball, of like, it's about the stats, it's about the data. If you want to win, it's incremental wins that you need to understand how the data works. And, it clearly sounds like you've implemented it with other organizations, and you're implementing it over at Firewire too. What are you learning about, consumer and retailer behavior that is helping you to switch things up or adapt to the changes that are taking place over at Firewire? Because it's a new world now. March 1st, it was something different than what it is after March 31st.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it begs for a very simple answer, in the sense that COVID couldn't have, like, everyone is terrified of COVID, right? The surfing community, again, when you talk about the actual human behind the data, we never thought that you don't put 1+1 = 2, right? We didn't think that people were going to go out and surf because they had free time, or that there was going to be this demand for, outdoor activities to the extent that it has been with COVID. And it's scary, because some of it is quite synthetic right now. We don't know where the actual standard averages are. It seems to be a little bit inflated. So um, the simple answer is if you watch the humans enough, then the data becomes easy. If you just watch the data, you're never going to get an answer because the data is intensely, you can slice and dice data any which way.
Mhm.
But when you look at a consumer, it's very simple to see, like, oh, that's what they're doing. All right, now the data makes sense. So let's apply the data in this format, knowing that this is how we can actually forecast going forward. And so, um, when you look at, I've heard people talk about Action Watch all the time, and some of the analogies that they come out of it, some of them are great, and some of them are like, wow, that's not the way you should be looking at it. Um, I've been in meetings where people look at it like a scorecard and they're high-fiving because they're number one in whatever category, but then they don't realize that there's a whole slew of white space that they are ignoring because they're so busy celebrating. And then next minute, a year goes by and they're like, how did we miss that? And it's like, you missed it because you weren't looking at it,
Yeah.
because you have to layer the data into what the consumers are doing. And so I always challenge people, hey, do the simple stuff. Put a survey on your website and ask people the questions. What are you doing? Not like, what do you think of this? This is like, what are you literally doing? Are you active? Are you going to the gym? Are you doing yoga? Are you surfing? How much are you surfing? What boards are you riding when you're surfing? Those activities will tell you very quickly. It allows you to triangulate the data, because data is scary, and again, if you ask the questions enough, you won't be scared of answering. And so, at VF Corporation, Steve Murray, who's now joined back at VF, he's one of my like merchandising idols. He always used to use the words like, "I challenge you guys to do this, this, and this." And I was so terrified of the word challenge because I thought it was a state of like, get your weapons. This is going to be a war. But when once you got used to it, you realize that, when you are used to airing your dirty laundry, you quickly find out that it's not that scary. And then often, you know, I've sat in meetings with design teams and they've hit a brick wall. They have no more ideas. They've run out of ideas. And I keep on saying, wow, this is incredible. They actually think it's about them. This team actually thinks it's about this people in this room. It's not. It's actually about the consumer. And if you want some ideas, just ask. They'll tell you. And when they tell you, you can take that to the bank because they're never wrong. And in my career, I look back and I see my failures and I go, wow, I was not listening. I wasn't listening to the consumer. I was so scared with my job that I listened to my boss because I was scared of my job. And I negated the fact that my obligation was actually to the consumer. Now, it's easy to say when you're not the boss. But when you get older in your career and you realize that you do have experience and you can actually take your experience to the bank, you become a little bit more, strong in your opinion because you know that the consumer is never wrong. So the advice is like, don't be scared in a time of COVID because the consumer is always going to be purchasing. They're always going to be doing something. The brands that have the time and the ability through tools or how are you going to work with it to ask the questions, do the surveys, stop freaking putting everything on discount and thinking that the consumer wants that. They really don't. You're just eroding your brand. Speak to the consumer. They'll come back. They'll tell you what they need. And then when you actually show them that you're listening, they're going to come back over and over again. So again, long-winded answer number 2.
Yeah, no, look, it's great. I mean, I love hearing this because I feel like you're speaking my language. I've always been a consumer behavior nerd. I always look at what the customer and the consumer is doing. And, I remember years ago when I was traveling, my way of looking at consumer behavior was when I was at the airport, sitting down, having lunch, and looking at all the different people going by and seeing what they were wearing and seeing, is there any brand that I'm seeing a pattern of what do these people look like and what do their lifestyles reflect? And do I see any brands from our industry? And I remember going to John Wayne Airport here in Orange County, and at the heart of action sports, and barely seeing any action sports brands at the busiest times of the day at the airport. And it just showed me how small our industry is, even in its own backyard, that people that are traveling and frequenting this airport were not wearing the familiar brands that I was growing up with. I saw more Nike and Converse than I saw Vans or Etnies. And,
Yeah,
you start to understand, that consumer behavior. And it's really interesting. And the other thing that I do too, Brett, is that I'm really interested in reverse engineering these trends as well, as to like, okay, when I see a customer walking down the street and they're wearing something or doing something, I always look at what were the steps that got that consumer into that product? What led to that? I'm always curious about that. And I don't think guys in our industry take that consumer behavior, what the consumer is thinking, the data, and look at it in a way with context. I think
yeah,
that's the biggest missing opportunity for guys in the industry. And you can walk into a store and see just a hodgepodge of products out on the floor with no rhyme or reason, other than the fact that all I can deduce is that, well, they're doing it, so we should do it, because if they're doing it, then that means we're on trend, and that means these guys are doing it, so we're all in the same boat.
yeah,
When really it's okay to think different and look differently. And I think that's one thing that has brought frustration to consumers in the action sports industry, the homogenization of the brands. You can
yeah,
take any logo and put it on any product in the industry, and it would be that brand's product. But there are certain things out there that you can look at and go, yep, I know that's a Patagonia product, or I know that's a North Face product, or I know that's a Vans product. You can just look at it and tell.
yeah, absolutely. Uh,
What? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna, second your sentiment there. That's exactly it. I remember, when I first met Pat from Ruka, I actually was. Well, I had a factory in South Africa, and we were going to do. Not I had a factory. I had a friend that had a factory in South Africa, and he wanted to do a pair of chino shorts and a pair of chino pants. It was like Conan O'Brien and and Pat in a little office in Costa Mesa. And I brought a bunch of catalogs in for them from other brands. And I slapped it on something. I said, hey, check these catalogs out. And Pat's like, take those things out of my office. We do not allow any other people's catalogs to poison the team here. And he was right on. And he always has had that mentality, and it's the reason why Ruka has been able to do what they've done. Paul Nodi has the same sentiment with Visla, and I think it all comes down to, again, whether they believe it or not. When you trust in your consumer and you're close enough to your consumer, whether they just be a group of friends for a small emerging brand, which just it gets extended out into like a regional population of like Huntington Beach or Costa Mesa, in the sense of like Volcom and Ruka.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty close network of humans at the end of the day, that we're all talking to each other. So as a brand gets bigger, that dissipates and the communication dissipates, and then there's a bunch of assumptions that happen, right? And that's where the problems start. Is when you assume the consumer is doing something.
Well, I think that's one part of it for sure. I think the other part of it is, if you look at guys in our industry, they might be beholden to private equity or investors or shareholders because they're public. So they're not really focusing on the consumer and the customer, as you're saying. They're more looking at, like, I got a number that I got to hit, and this product, fingers crossed, will help me hit that number. I hope.
Yeah,
It's a bit of
yeah,
a guessing game, and I think that's one of the things that our industry has to get back towards, is that the consumer should be the most important shareholder, because if you satisfy the consumer, you will satisfy private equity, your investors, your shareholders, and everything, because the consumer is the one that is actually buying your product. The other person is just lending you the money to,
yeah,
create the
yeah,
business. And I think, if more brands spent time focusing on the consumer and understanding the consumer and humanizing that brand experience, I think we'd see a lot more success out of the brands as opposed to the struggling, that I
Yeah.
hear of, the reps and the retailers and the brands going through every season. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this: where are the opportunities for brands and retailers in this industry to survive and thrive? As you talk about like the data and the consumer behavior and everything.
So there's actually a lot of really good things happening right now, a lot of which have taken a long time to come into fruition. Um, a lot of surf shops are, we call them brick and mortar, right? But a lot of surf shops actually have some of the best performing websites out there. Surf Station, one of them, they like have 110,000 uniques a month, transacting incredible business online. There's CleanLine, um, there's there's a bunch of really good operators out there. And if you are a brick and mortar store and you still think that ecom is too big, too hard, it's too expensive, then you need to relook at it, because you just have to take one look at Shopify stock. Shopify, you can get a great Shopify site up for, you know, even if it's a custom site, you can get one up for $4,000. Um, and if you have problems, just let me know. I've got lots of contacts in that world. Um, but the reason why I say this is because there are marketplace technology like the Exchange Collective, that I'm really, really good friends with those guys. We built the back-end marketplace for the World Surf League, which just launched, unfortunately, during COVID. So, they're going through the motions of trying to get the events up and running next year. However, the marketplace is facilitated by Exchange Collective. And, people like San Diego have the exchange in the back end. What it allows is brick and mortar stores to actually have access to brands inventory and do drop shipping, similar to like what people drop ship on Amazon. And so, this technology and 5 to 10 years ago cost, 100 something thousand dollars. So small brands couldn't afford it. But if you're a surf shop, you can literally use an open theme. Consider this: 70% of all transactions are done in your phone. Think about how sexy you don't need a phone to be. It needs to be simple. The more complex it is, the less you're going to transact. Shopify has the highest transacting platforms on cell phones. Even their basic platforms that are free operate like incredibly well. I have a bunch of my small brands. I've got a baby brand. I've got my own brands on them that transact really, really well. And if you connect into Exchange Collective, now you've got a site that you can leverage your social media on to push traffic through that will transact, not just your brick and mortar. And the reason why I say this is selfishly, at Firewire and other brands that I've touched, they're in a world of COVID when we don't know when there's going to be a shutdown. You have to have an ecom presence, not just to sell, but ecom sites are half the battle in communication. What you have to sell, and so when it allows you to captures people's emails to have a very earnest and honest conversation about your products, your offering, what you don't have, what you do have. For instance, at Firewire, we've got a website. We went live on a website in March, but over 60% of our transactions are at our brick and mortar. And it's simply because we don't have stock. The stock's all at retail. And so, during COVID, we're like, holy crap, all our stock is at retail. What are we going to do? Even if we went live with ecom, we don't have stock. But at the end of the day, you know, retailers are the part of the journey that people seem to think that it's a nice to have, but you cannot build a brand online. You name one brand. I mean, there's brands out there that have done an incredibly good job, like Outerknown, that have arguably kind of, made everyone question, oh, you can build a brand online. However, Outerknown, those guys are also looking at different avenues to help validate the consumer, build trust with this consumer. So it's really hard to build brands outside of having. You have to have all the channels, and omni-channel. People talk about it all the time. It's a buzzword, but really, again, it's where the consumers are and how they're behaving. There's Instagram, Facebook, commerce now with their stores, but that's where the opportunities are. You look at the technology, it's not expensive. If people are telling you it's expensive, go look, find someone else because it's not expensive. And you get on to the likes of an Exchange Collective. You're building, an offering that is meaningful for your customers, and you're drop shipping. Um, so that's a big opportunity for this industry. And the brick and mortar guys that actually do well with ecom are going to be the guys that are around for a long time, because they are able to tell their story. They're able to engage with the consumers. And when you engage with the consumer from a digital standpoint, you get to have their email, and you get to speak to them if they grant access to you. You get to speak to them um, on an ongoing basis. So that whole analogy of a boyfriend and girlfriend, it's like you now have their number, and you can call them and see what they're up to. Um, and you can offer them discounts if you want to take that road, which I highly discourage, because it does erode. Um, it's been proven, the data's been proven to be erosive, um, versus having this conversation like, hey, what are you up to? How can you tell me something about what you're doing? And that builds the trust, that builds the relationship, and that builds at the end of the day the transactions.
Yeah, look, you shared a lot of great information in that little sound bite, and what kind of brings a thought to me is that as I talk to retailers, how many of them still in this day and age of being 2020 have not embraced online e-commerce solutions? They're still worried about Amazon taking over. They want customers to come into their store and buy only at their store, in their store. They don't want them window shopping or anything like that. And I think, to your point, I mean, Shopify is such an incredible solution. I remember building websites in the late 90s, and it would cost 30, 40, $50,000 because of all the custom coding that had to
Yeah,
be done on a regular basis, and how that custom coding had to be updated almost monthly,
yeah,
and how costly that was. And now you can literally set up a Shopify site for $25 a month. Even if you don't want a custom package,
yeah,
it's all ready to go. And to that point, I mean, I set up my nonprofit, Vote the Ocean, under Shopify website too, so we could transact donations or anything that we
yeah,
wanted to. And it's been very helpful, but it's also been device agnostic. I see so many nonprofits with outdated websites, and ours
yeah,
is mobile friendly and it's easy for people to donate. And we've been doing that over the last couple of months, and how quickly those transactions add up and how easy it is. I'm still floored that more retailers don't take advantage of that opportunity to build their retail sales and their retail brand online and connect with more consumers. Get that email list going, communicate with your customers, find out what they want, and then translate that back into what Dave and Dan are doing with the Exchange Collective. I've learned so much about what they're doing, and I've had conversations with them. And yeah, what an incredible way to build out your online experience. Look, I don't want to take up a lot of your time, and I could talk to you for hours because you're definitely talking my jam. What's your advice to brands and retailers if they want to stay relevant in this pandemic world? This is the new world that we're going to be living in. It's not going back to what it was pre-pandemic, at least for years until we get a vaccine. This is the new world we live in, and I think people are still trying to figure it out. Any thoughts or advice to them?
yeah. The immediate thought that comes to mind is, remember that your currency is your consumer. Don't ever panic because someone's telling you the sky's falling. You can panic when your consumers start turning their back on you. It is a harder thing for a consumer to turn their back on something that they have grown to love. Um, if you are selling a product that you are just selling a product for, and assuming that when your product's selling, you're actually selling brand, just be careful. You want to make sure you're selling brand before you're selling product, because products come and go, but brands last forever. So my advice to both retailers and brands, because at the end of the day they share a common consumer, is reach out to your consumers, spend time with them. They are locked at home often or not doing much, they except for going through social media, which data is showing that they're exhausted. So reach out to them. Emails are starting to trend back because people are starting to actually engage in different platforms again. Believe it or not, like even online, in-mail catalogs, like Wayfair is now sending out catalogs because they realize people are at home. So there's different forums. Keep your eyes open to what consumers are doing. If you see people reading magazines again, you should probably start asking questions about the validity of magazines. People say print is dead. I don't know. Like, consumer will be the one that decides that. And yeah, arguably they have shown that their interest in social media last 10 years has been intense. But let's be honest, that could change in the next 5 years. So just remember, don't panic. The consumer is in control. Make sure that you're close to the consumer, and then make sure you listen to them and you react to them in an earnest, honest way, and then they will give you the credit.
Yeah. Great advice, Brett. I could talk to you for hours. I've so enjoyed these insights, and I know that everybody that comes to our website is going to enjoy them as well. You might even pick up a couple of extra clients, with what you've shared, because I think it's really important. And everybody that I talk to is looking for answers, and the insights that you shared is exactly what they want to hear. So, look, thanks so much for taking time. And I want to revisit this conversation again at the beginning of the year just to see how things are tracking. Can we
For
do that
sure.
maybe?
Yeah, I'd actually like to get you involved with floor sites at some point too, with the boys and girls at SEMA, because it's going to be a free tool for the trade to use, and I think it'll be helpful for everyone in this COVID world to help at least brick and mortar and brands kind of keep the train on the rails.
Yeah, let's do it. Send me over some information. I'd love to start playing with it and taking a look at it, and let's share it with other folks in the industry as well.
Sounds great, man. Thanks,
Cool.
Bob, for the opportunity, and my phone's always open for you. So just let me know when you need another round table.
Oh, sounds good, man. I will definitely be hitting you up. Thanks again, Brett.
Thanks, Bob.